The 1998 Lost in Space film contains many behind-the-scenes details that most fans still do not know, and several of them are highly unusual compared to what actually made it into the movie. The production cost around $80 million, featured some of the biggest stars of that decade, and set visual effects records that surprised the industry. The casting drama, the deleted creatures, and the actors who flatly refused to show up tell a complex story the studio preferred to keep quiet. The original Lost in Space television show from the 1960s was set in the future year of 1997. When the studio greenlit a feature film, they deliberately timed production to wrap in 1997 and release the movie in early 1998, matching the show's original timeline as a quiet nod to longtime fans. Most people sitting in theaters that April had no idea the release date itself carried meaning. It took a close read of the source material to catch it, which meant the studio was winking at fans who had watched the original series as kids and were now old enough to bring their own children to the sequel. Gary Oldman built his career on characters who frightened adults, playing corrupt officials, dangerous criminals, and figures the average parent would never let a child watch on screen. By 1998, his own kids still had not seen him perform in a major film because nearly everything he had made carried a rating that locked them out entirely. Taking the role of Dr. Smith in Lost in Space changed that. The decision to join a family-friendly production came down to wanting his children to finally see what their father did for a living, and the trade-off meant playing a villain designed for younger audiences rather than adult viewers. For Oldman, that was the entire point of saying yes. The film's version of the widely recognized B-9 robot looked nothing like its predecessor. The designers gave it a darker, heavier, more aggressive build constructed for an era of bigger spectacle. Close your eyes during those scenes and the voice drops you straight back into the 1960s. The production team tracked down Dick Tufeld, the exact same voice actor who had voiced the robot in the original television series, and brought him back for the new film. More than 30 years after first recording those lines, Tufeld reprised the role without a single replacement, and in a time when studios routinely discarded everything about a source property, that choice was unusually faithful. Matt LeBlanc was deep into filming the television series Friends when Lost in Space started production, which meant he spent months flying between two continents to honor both commitments. The crew built a practical solution directly into the costume design, ensuring Don West's spacesuit came equipped with a retractable helmet that could close fully over the actor's face, leaving no skin visible on camera. If LeBlanc's schedule made him unavailable on a given shoot day, a stunt double could step into that suit, lower the visor, and film the scene without anyone in a theater ever noticing the difference. The helmet appeared in the final cut as a regular story element, but its actual function was keeping the production calendar from falling apart. Jared Harris filmed every scene as the older, conflicted version of Will Robinson in full, giving a complete physical performance across multiple shooting days. After production wrapped, the studio decided his voice did not match the character they wanted on screen, so they brought in American voice actor Lex Lang to dub about half of Harris's existing dialogue. Every word the character speaks in the finished film came from someone who was never present during those scenes. Harris described the result publicly as a stitched-together performance consisting of his body and another person's voice combined in post-production. It stands as one of the more unusual dubbing decisions in a mainstream Hollywood release from that period. The studio reached out to Jonathan Harris, who had played Dr. Smith in the original 1960s series and made that character famous, and offered him a cameo in the new film. The caveat was that the part was not Dr. Smith. They wanted Harris to appear as a completely different character. He refused without hesitation. Harris made his position clear, stating that if the role was not Dr. Smith, there was nothing to discuss. The studio held firm, Harris held firm, and the conversation ended there. Gary Oldman stepped into the role with no bridge connecting the original series to the remake. Bill Mumy played Will Robinson in the 1960s television version and built a version of that character fans carried with them for decades. When the 1998 production assembled its cast, Mumy pushed to play the older, morally collapsed version of Will Robinson, who appears at the film's climax, a figure shaped by 20 years of isolation and desperation. Director Stephen Hopkins turned him down, deciding that casting the original actor as a dark, future version of his own beloved character would be too distracting from the plot. Both of the most recognized faces from the television series wound up watching from the outside while other actors occupied their roles. Blarp, the small alien creature who bonds with the Robinson family's youngest daughter, appeared in the final cut as a computer-generated character. What audiences never saw was the version that preceded that decision. Jim Henson's Creature Shop, the practical effects company with decades of experience building physical puppets and creatures, constructed a full-scale, adult version of Blarp as an animatronic puppet. Footage featuring that puppet was shot and cut into early versions of the film. The studio replaced the vast majority of its appearances with digital effects, though a couple of shots of the physical Blarp puppet actually survived in the final film. The Creature Shop's work never reached a single theater screen. Before Matt LeBlanc locked in his role as Don West, the studio sent the offer to a different actor first, his friend's co-star, Matthew Perry. Had Perry accepted, the two most prominent faces of that film would have both come from the same television series, which would have created an odd doubling of off-screen identities. Perry declined, LeBlanc stepped in, and the casting connected the film to Friends through one degree of separation anyway. Perry was known for sharp comedic timing, built around rapid verbal wit, which would have produced a noticeably different version of the action hero role LeBlanc delivered with a more physical, straightforward energy. By the standards of 1998, 750 visual effects shots in a single film was a number that stopped industry professionals in their tracks. Today's blockbusters routinely surpass 2,000 effect shots. In the late 90s, achieving that volume was a notable feat that often took anywhere from 8 months to over a year of post-production work spread across multiple specialized companies operating simultaneously. The spaceship sequences, the planetary environments, and the combat scenes all drew from that pool, and each company was responsible for keeping its portion visually consistent with work happening across town at a completely different facility. Lost in Space pushed the outer limits of what the industry could physically produce at that scale in that time frame. All those computer-generated images existed alongside a physical set that occupied multiple sound stages in London. The Jupiter 2, the Robinson family spacecraft, was constructed as a practical build measuring 70 feet long, 26 feet wide, and 17 feet tall. Actors moved through real corridors, cameras tracked movement across actual surfaces, and the lighting responded to a physical environment rather than a digital approximation built in post. Building something that large let the performances carry genuine spatial weight, grounding the interior scenes in a way that pure digital sets rarely achieve. For a production already spending heavily on computer effects, committing to that footprint was a deliberate and expensive choice. Every principal actor signed a 3-picture deal, and the film ended on a deliberate cliffhanger setting up further adventures, though no sequel was ever fully mapped out or written on paper. The Robinson family would reach the planet they had been searching for throughout the entire first film, only to discover that humans already lived there, the result of the family accidentally traveling through time at some earlier point in the series. The concept looped back on itself in a way that could have reframed the first movie as setup rather than standalone story. The domestic box office numbers came in at around $69 million in the United States, against an $80 million production budget. The studio quietly retired the 3-picture plan, and the sequel stayed exactly where it had always lived, on paper, in a drawer, somewhere. Lost in Space in 1998 was a production full of ideas that outpaced its results. A giant ship built on a London soundstage, a robot voiced by a man from the original series, a sequel designed to reframe everything that came before. The facts behind that film connect to something that runs through the entire history of large-scale science fiction. where ambition almost always exceeds what the finished product can hold. That gap between what a production reaches for and what audiences actually receive is where the most interesting stories tend to live. And this one had that gap in abundance.